Cancelled before its time, Firefly has been kept flying ever since with a patchwork of comics and novels. In this short series, we're going to talk about how all these entries fit into the larger Firefly story. In this first video, I'm only going to be discussing the main Serenity comics by Dark Horse. That is, Those Left Behind, Better Days, The Shepherd's Tale, Leaves on the Wind, and No Power in the Verse. There are also 5 short one-shot Serenity comics from Dark Horse, but we're going to leave those for another video. I'm going to attempt to keep this series mainly spoiler-free. I won't give you any of the answers that these stories provide, but I will tell you the questions that they're trying to answer, to give you an idea of what the purpose of each story is. As a visual aid, I'm going to put up the Firefly timeline at the side here, so you can see how each entry fits into the overall story. It might seem quite simple to begin with and maybe a bit unnecessary, but as the series progresses, this will get more complicated. So first up, Volume 1, Those Left Behind. This graphic novel was originally a 3-part miniseries released back in 2005 as a tie-in to the movie, and its job was very simply to bridge the gap between the show and the movie. It answers the question of why, in the movie, the operative is hunting River, whereas in the show it was the Hands of Blue. We also see in this story the reason why Inara and Book aren't travelling on Serenity anymore by the time of the movie. No difficulty placing this one on the timeline. It occurs between the end of the series and the movie. A little bit more difficult to place, however, is Volume 2, Better Days. Better Days came along in 2008 and was also originally a 3-part miniseries. Better Days is about Mal and Co finally having a really good day, hitting the jackpot on their latest job. What's nice about Better Days is that it really just feels like another episode of Firefly, even going so far as to sew into the story a few clues about the plot lines Firefly was building towards. Whereas Those Left Behind had a bit of heavy lifting to do in terms of plot points to set up the movie, Better Days gets to breathe and just be its own thing. It's probably my favourite Serenity comic. While it's true of the other comics as well, I think Better Days in particular really showcases the real triumph that the dialogue is so good that you can hear the characters' voices very well. Like, these comics absolutely nail all the little quirks of each character's speech and their mannerisms. They're all brilliant, but I think Better Days is the jewel in the crown when it comes to aligning with the show. The timeline for Better Days is a little bit tricky though. On the face of it, it might seem obvious. You can see that the flying mule is involved, and that's something that they have in the movie, but you never see in the show. And Inara is still present in this story, so presumably it must be between Objects in Space and Those Left Behind. And for a long time, that's generally what was assumed to be the case. I didn't really like that placement though. And the reason being that in this story, Inara has every opportunity to disembark Serenity. She's apparently eager to do so in Objects in Space, and we see her leaving the ship in Those Left Behind. Yet, in Better Days, she ends the story still on board, even though she's had plenty of opportunities to leave. And in fact, the question of her imminent departure isn't mentioned once in Better Days. Nothing makes it feel as though Inara is going to be leaving soon. This problem bothered me for years, but I believe there is now a solution, but that would require me to talk about some of the details from one of the Titan novels. So I'm going to shelve that argument for a later video, and for now I'm going to leave Better Days in its old position after Objects in Space, but we're going to put an asterisk onto it because I'm going to come back to this. For now, we'll move on to Volume 3, The Shepherd's Tale. This story went straight to graphic novel in 2010, and the mission with this story was plain: reveal Shepherd Book's mysterious backstory that had been hinted at and alluded to throughout the series. This story is broken into chunks. As we progress through the book, we go further and further back in the Shepherd's life, starting from his final moments on Haven all the way back to his childhood. It's a very clever device, and I think it works really well to tell this particular story, because you have all these clues that have been threaded throughout the TV show that need to get some sort of payoff and some sort of explanation. but at the same time you don't want to be lingering too long on any one chapter of Shepherd Book's life. You know, every chapter could be its whole graphic novel, but you want to get the answers and tell the story of his entire life. So this repeated flashback structure works very well. Placing it in the timeline, I suppose we'll place it after the movie, but really it's a series of flashbacks, so really most of the book will occur before the very first episode, in some cases years or decades earlier. But if we view the first scene as the present, well, that takes place sort of concurrently with the movie, and then think of the rest of the book as being a series of flashbacks. Volume 4, Leaves on the Wind. Leaves on the Wind was the first sequel series that we got, and it was super exciting when it came out in 2014. We'd had a couple of short Serenity comics which took place after the movie, but Leaves on the Wind was the first proper story that really advanced Firefly beyond what we'd seen in the movie. It was also the longest run that we'd had at that point. It was a full 6 issues when it first came out. And I remember being so stoked every month or so, making the walk into town after class to buy the latest issue the day it came out, assuming that they weren't sold out, which often they were. I'd read all the previous issues the day before in preparation for getting the latest copy. Other than Firefly, I'm not really like a big comics guy, so this experience was really special for me. Leaves on the Wind was great fun. The story itself, it takes place about 8 months after the movie, so let's place it down there on the timeline. I wouldn't say that this story feels like it's preoccupied with tying up loose ends from the show and the movie, but it does do that. Mostly, though, it's just interested in continuing the story. It answers questions like, what did the Miranda incident do to the Alliance, to the rest of the verse? How have things changed for Mal and his crew since we last saw them? It ends on not so much a cliffhanger, but at least a promise of more to come. And sure enough, in 2016, we saw a second sequel series, Volume 5, No Power in the Verse. This was also originally a 6-part miniseries, and it followed some of the plot threads that Leaves in the Wind laid down, while also doing a nice job at just advancing the larger, verse-wide story, while still feeling like a fairly small personal story about Mal and co. No Power in the Verse is the last entry in the timeline in terms of chronology, and it's super annoying because, like Leaves in the Wind, it finishes with a promise of more to come. Unfortunately, that's a promise that's probably going to take a while to fulfill, because a couple of years after No Power in the Verse was published, Boom Studios took over the Firefly Comics license, and Boom started doing their own thing with it. They weren't really interested in following the story of No Power in the Verse. I still have hope that one day this story will be continued, but I'm not holding my breath for anything anytime soon. So, those were the 5 Serenity comics from Dark Horse, positioned into their place in the Firefly timeline. Thank you for watching. Next up, we'll be discussing the Titan novels. This is an ongoing series. These books are still coming out. We're looking forward to the 5th one coming out in March. I really like these novels. I'm really looking forward to discussing them. So check out that video when it comes out, and keep an eye out for another video which will deal with that asterisk over Better Days, and we're going to find a better placement for it. See you then.